Firstly, some crucial context. You have probably heard at this point the bog standard excuse for a Republican election victory, which has been paraded out for every administration since, I think, Reagan. Don't take my word for that, but it's definitely been for my whole life. Despite this really not being true, anyone who's been paying attention for the last 30 years would be able to tell you that Democratic presidencies were better on most economic metrics than Republican ones. I won't get into the details of that here, but suffice to say that Republicans presenting themselves as the party of good economic policy is just fake news. And it's also not what the exit polls suggest was the issue that people cared the most about. We do know what the real reason was. Immigration. This is, of course, not because there is actually a massive immigration crisis in this country. The last few years have been some of the quietest at the border, since COVID measures reduced people's ability to travel in the first place. Much of the immigration which has occurred has been asylum seekers from countries we consider allies. But it is also true that who the government in the U.S. considers an ally and who the population considers our international allies are not always the same thing. And there's at least a sizable portion of the population whose list of allies is very different from the outgoing administration's. However, much like with Brexit a decade ago, the truth of the immigration situation is not really relevant here because it was left out of the public discourse almost entirely. White people saw a slow increase in products with dual language labeling as companies pandered to upwardly mobile Latina families. They also saw an increase in visibility of the Latina community in entertainment. Things like Disney's films, Coco, Encanto, and Luca, as well as prominent characters and other properties and prominent personalities. They also saw Latina people succeed more in the professional sphere, the citizen children of immigrant parents having enjoyed higher education and access to scholarships designed by their communities for them. It wasn't just them either. There are other groups of recent legal immigrants, such as the ones from Haiti, who were scapegoated with racist attacks during the campaign. Like with Brexit, what people feel is under threat isn't their material livelihood, but their spiritual one. And I do not use that term on accident because this was overwhelmingly an evangelical Christian phenomenon. One of the two groups of non-white voters which broke for Trump was evangelical Christians. But it cannot be chalked up solely to religion because non-evangelical Protestants who were white also voted for Trump. Meanwhile, non-evangelical Protestants who weren't white voted for Harris. This is actually a reversal of the usual situation. Traditional Catholics make up a lot of this voting bloc, and they often go Republican, while the highly progressive UCC and Methodist churches usually break for Democrats. This is probably the one and only place where the whole Palestine discourse had an effect, but not the intended one. What seems to have happened is that while on the one hand Palestinian Christians turned out to strategically vote for Harris, many progressive white Christians abstained over their dislike of Harris's position on Palestine, which was admittedly bad. Now, this is a guess, but it's based on the math and what I know about the popularity of different religious denominations. Another thing emerges from the exit poll data as well. Misogyny was a motivator. Not only did a very pitiful number of voters say that abortion rights were an important issue for them, but also cisgender non-black men overwhelmingly broke for Trump. I say non-black there because both white and Latino cisgender men did this. Latina cisgender women, however, went for Harris, but white cisgender women did not. What these white women were doing was choosing which of their identities mattered more and siding with their race over their gender, as they unfortunately have far too frequently in the past. I say cisgender here because transgender people are invisible in this dataset. This is because there are simply not enough of them, and because they are likely split up by the fact that this poll is based on self-ID. Trans people who aren't out or aren't fully out yet would have had to lie for fear of bystanders overhearing, while trans people who are out would be counted with their preferred gender. There is no way to prove how the community voted overall, but I would also say that there is no way the community did not break overwhelmingly for Harris, albeit not particularly with much enthusiasm. Harris's record on trans rights was spotty, and she didn't do a wonderful job of defending us. But at the same time, Governor Walz's record as an ally is stellar, and he vigorously defended us at the VP debate. So any individual trans person's understanding of the campaign's position was going to be heavily influenced by which media they consumed. The same cannot be said for all segments of the LGBTQ+ community, as many transphobic lesbians appeared to have gone for Trump based on TikTok videos where they admit it out loud. While it's likely that lesbians overall still broke for Harris, it was probably not by a very wide margin. The effect of transphobia was likely even greater among straight women, however, as many voters cited girls' sports as an issue for them. This would almost entirely be because of the transphobic conspiracy theory that men are going trans solely to compete in women's sports. Of course, transphobia very quickly bleeds into racism, as the drama of Iman Khalif at the Paris Olympics demonstrated. Khalif, a cisgender woman from Algeria, was accused of being a man by transphobes, an accusation which put her at considerable social, financial, and legal risk because gender transition is not legal in Algeria. She, fortunately, is suing the most prominent of the people who spread this theory, No points for guessing who, it's all the usual suspects, and seems likely to get compensation. But this discourse seems to have had an effect on the American election in favor of the Republicans. They ran nakedly transphobic ads, which seemed to have fired voters' imaginations. The drama of Gisèle Pellicot in France also seems to have turned out misogynistic American men, likely because the manosphere influencers have been harping on it. All of this is to say that, yes, absolutely, most Americans were voting based on hatred for someone and not based on what they wanted for themselves. Again, this is exactly like Brexit, and so was the regret. Many white women, immediately after learning the result, recognized what it would likely mean for, well, themselves and also minorities. Perhaps because of hearing about this from friends and family or from influencers. They discussed somewhere and came up with a sign which would indicate who was a safe person to be around. A blue bracelet. Except, of course, there is one problem with this. This was purely a thing made up by white cis women, which no significant number of racialized women or trans women of any race discussed. The bracelets in question also are generic, and as far as I know, their purchase does not fund any resistance effort. At least the pussy hats in 2016 were distinctive, and many of the versions were genuinely sold as charity fundraisers. But even still, they were symbols rooted in a shallow and ephemeral indignation, which produced no meaningful action. The blue bracelet trend, having already been called out by racialized and queer women, is probably going to fade soon as well. But many people have been understandably confused by the hostile response they received from racialized women. And it's not their job, it's not the job of these racialized women to explain their positions. After all, there is a symbol which has been used very prominently this year, which does genuinely indicate one's resistance membership. And that is the scarf I am wearing, the Keffiyeh. This scarf, and its color variations, signal support for Palestinian independence. And in this past year, it has become normal for non-Palestinian people to wear. And one might say, hang on, isn't that cultural appropriation? No. Why? Because this scarf was made by Palestinian artisans, and the money I spent on it went to their family members in Gaza. It is something they chose to share with others outside of their culture, and something I am honored to wear to express my support for them. It is not something which most people know about. My parents don't know it is anything other than a scarf. And it has a long history of being worn by those who took meaningful action. I would also not claim that my support for Palestine makes me a safe person to be around for everyone. I am who I am, imperfections and all. Although I certainly strive to do right by everyone, racialized and not, whether I am safe in any given person's estimation is not for me to decide. The fact is, I am queer and neurodivergent, so I will always make people feel unsafe without trying to, whether they are racialized or not. This used to annoy me. And so I do get where some of the annoyance on the part of these straight white women comes from. But I've become more aware of what trauma does to people recently. My neurodivergent traits are just going to trigger some people, and the best thing I can do is to back away quietly when that happens. I've had to push people away because they were not safe and respectful of my boundaries. So I can't resent anyone for doing the same to me. That would be hypocritical, and I strive to avoid that at all costs. So, to my white sisters, recognize that if people push you away, that is something they are doing for their own health. Getting defensive will not help your case. Additionally, the way that queer and racialized people will know you are safe is by observing your actions. Wearing a blue bracelet, or even a keffiyeh, will not tell them anything like that. If you genuinely want to help, donate time and money to organizations which work for racial justice and queer rights, and educate yourself on these topics. There's a great deal of excellent literature, and in the description I have listed many excellent content creators who talk about these subjects. Understand that they will say things which will make you feel angry and ashamed. I know, because I went through all of this on my journey to being the self you see here. What I challenge you to do is to watch their videos without commenting. Put the playlist on while you do dishes or gardening or something else that requires your hands to be busy. This forces you to simply listen to what they say. Did I sometimes do this? Yeah. For much of my life, I still thought I was a woman and felt a lot of the things you will feel. I won't pretend this was not painful, especially because I was not always smart enough to restrain my emotions. But I will not change a moment of it. I am happier now, having discovered who I truly am, and decided where I stand.